Okay guys, in this particular lesson we are going to focus on inorganic compounds in our particular unit on biochemistry and the chemicals of life. So as we previously stated, inorganic compounds are going to rarely, and I want you to make note of that, rarely again, remember the fact that we have things like CO2 which do contain carbon, but rarely are inorganic compounds going to contain carbon. They're also typically smaller than organic compounds, and that is because if they don't contain carbon, they don't have that ability for four bonds, right? They're often referred to as being electrolytes because they dissociate in water, and are examples that are crucial for human body functioning, right, are water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and inorganic salts. FXN, that's functioning, for human body functioning. So, when we talk about water, right, we should know that it's the most abundant compound in living material, and that's because it makes up about 2/3 or 70% of the weight of an adult human, and that weight is really going to be dependent on that liquid component. I want you to focus on the fact that we're talking about water here, and water is a major component of blood. It's a component of lymph, all right, the fluid that is released by the lymphatic system. It's a major component in interstitial fluids, all right, interstitial fluids being the stuff between your cells, as well as being a major part of what's in your cells. So when you think about water, it really is everywhere in your body. Water is also something that is helping to make metabolic processes responsible, and the reason is because of its ability to help things dissolve. And water has the ability to help things dissolve because it's going to be able to use that polarity, right? Remember, we talked about polarity being positive on one end of a molecule, like water, and negative on the other end. And that charge is going to help it pull other molecules apart, so it's going to really help them dissolve. Water is also going to be responsible for transporting chemicals. So for example, blood, all right, again, major component of blood is water, and that water component is going to be helping us transport gases, and it's going to help us transport nutrients, those organic compounds, vitamins, minerals, etc. Water also absorbs and transports heat. It shouldn't be any surprise to you that water holds heat well. When you heat up a pot of water on the stove, it takes a lot longer for it to cool down, and that's because of water's ability to retain that heat. So, for example, the water component of blood plays a major role in regulating body temperature. So blood regulates body temp, and we know that blood is going to regulate body temp by sweating. All right, it's going to actually release some of that water component of the blood when it gets too warm, and that's going to be released as sweat. Oxygen, our next inorganic substance that we're going to talk about, is one of those really important molecules, and that's because it's responsible for energy, and we know that when we talk about energy, we're talking about ATP. And that's because it's a major part of the cellular respiration equation, and we should know that cellular respiration, we're talking about C6, H12O6, glucose, plus oxygen is going to yield us carbon dioxide, some water molecules, and that ATP. So without that oxygen reactant, our glucose would never get broken down and that energy would never get made. So oxygen plays a really key role in sustaining life. Carbon dioxide, like we already said, does contain carbon, so it's a little exception to the rule, but we still consider it an inorganic compound, and we should know that that's a waste. We need to get rid of it. It's actually something that's found in large quantities in the blood, but the interesting thing is that it's not typically in carbon dioxide form. And the reason that it's not typically in carbon dioxide form is because what actually happens is that as that carbon dioxide combines with water in the blood, it's going to create a different molecule, right? This different molecule is called carbonic acid. That carbonic acid is going to dissociate, it's going to separate into hydrogen ions and into bicarbonate ions. And as it separates into these ions, we should be able to tell that that ion, that hydrogen, can affect pH. So sometimes we've referred to the idea that carbon dioxide content in the blood can affect the pH of the blood or the acidity of the blood, and that's because the carbon dioxide doesn't remain in CO2 form. It's actually going to transfer its form. It's going to release hydrogen ions. And then what happens is that before the blood, the carbon dioxide reaches the oxygen or reaches the lungs, this whole entire process is going to reverse. And we're going to go back to the CO2 that's going to be able to release through the lungs, and it's going to be able to be exhaled. All right, so our carbon dioxide is this key byproduct or waste product from a lot of our metabolic reactions. One of those metabolic reactions, like we saw on the previous slide, was cellular respiration. Inorganic salts, all right, these we should have already in previous lesson discussed the idea that salts are directly related to those ions, and these ions can play a key role in a lot of different chemical reactions. Remember, metabolism, we're talking about all of the chemical reactions. All right, inorganic salts are going to constantly be lost, so we're sweating them out. They're leaving through urine, but they need to be replaced in order to maintain that homeostasis. All right, that's that electrolyte balance in order to maintain that ion concentration inside and outside of the cell. You guys may recall drawings, something like this from biology class, where we talked about there being a beaker of a solution and a cell within that solution, and we talked about the concentration of the solutes, the substances that were outside of the cell in comparison to what was inside of the cell. And those solutes in this case would be those electrolytes, right? Would be those ions that are released by inorganic salts, and them needing to be able to pass back and forth between the cell membrane in order to even out, to maintain that or reach that equilibrium state. And some of those inorganic salts, or those important ions really that we're talking about, so important ions that we're focusing on for body functioning are going to be sodium ions, potassium ions, chlorine ions, calcium ions, plus. And they have lots of important roles in homeostasis. So being able to help with bone development is an important function. We talked in class about them playing a role in nerve impulses. And there's a wide variety of other things that these ions are needed for in order to maintain homeostasis. So in order for those ions to be maintained at a specific level, we need to use those inorganic salts and consume those inorganic salts to replace what we lose. This pretty much wraps it up for our lesson on inorganic compounds. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to see me.